Financial freedom is being able to afford what you want when you want it. And despite the fact that it feels elusive, it can be achieved. It's doable. There's a system in place to do it. And in this video, I'm going to teach you that system. I know it's a big claim. Hi, my name is Tyus. I make videos about personal freedom, and when people often think about their freedom, their liberty, they often think about their financial freedom. They want to be financially free to do anything they want to do. And while I'm not going to claim it's an easy thing to accomplish, it is achievable. And in this video, I'm going to provide you with the 15 steps to get there. So strap in. This is not an easy process, but it's an achievable process. It's a real process, and it can be accomplished by systematic strategy. So I'm going to give you that strategy today. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, and there's 15 steps. That's not a small process, and this can take, for most, I will say, it can take years, if not decades. So let's dive in really fast, and I'm gonna just start at the beginning, which is assessing where you're currently at. The first thing you wanna do, and this isn't a hard thing to do, is just to take out a piece of paper and write down, okay, how much debt do I have? Where is that debt fall? Do I have any liabilities? And a liability is something that is just a monthly expense. So anything that is costing you money every month. Now, there could be a direct liability, like let's say a Netflix subscription, where you know it's costing you $15 every month, or maybe something that's a little bit more devious or dubious. Maybe, for example, a car, believe it or not, is a liability, and it takes money from you every single month. Even if the car is paid off, you've got insurance, but in addition to that, it also has maintenance that has to take place. You've got to, change oil. You have to put new tires on it occasionally, and so a car is a liability. And figuring that out, putting down all those liabilities, identifying what property you have. That's in addition to just money. You might have your savings, you might have some money put aside, maybe you've got a little bit in a retirement account. That's fantastic. But you might also have some additional property, whether that is a house or an apartment or whether that's a car or a camera or whatever. A laptop that you're watching this on right now, your phone, all of that is your property. Write it down. Let's create a list. Let's get all that information out there so that we can start assessing this. We also want to include our income. How much are we making on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis, or however you earn, whether it's a salary, whether it's hourly. Let's figure that out and get it locked in so that we know it 100%. We want to identify any assets we have if we're fortunate enough to have assets. Now, an asset is the opposite of that liability. The liability costing you money every month or every 6 months or whatever. An asset makes you money. So that could be a dividend. That could be you rent a room out in your house and you're making money off of that every year or every month, whatever. You get the idea. An asset's something that's going to be making you income, while a liability is going to be something that is costing you income. And then lastly, you also want to be aware of what investments you have, if you have any investments. If you don't, that's okay. I know a lot of people that are going to be watching this are just buried, they're up to their neck in debt, and it's okay if all you have on this assessment is, okay, I've got a ton of debt and not enough income, I've got no assets, I've got tons of liabilities. I get that. What's important is not to ignore the reality that you're in. It's important to get it out there on paper so that you understand the situation that you're in, because if you're creating a map, you not only need to know the destination, which is going to be, in this case, financial freedom, but you also need to know where you're starting from so that you can draw a line from point A to point B. You've got to figure out how you're going to get to the destination, and you have to know where you're starting from to get there. So, step one, do an assessment of where you're at. Debts, liabilities, property, income, assets, and investments. Write it all down before moving on to step two. Step two, and we're still in the easy phase. We're not doing anything hard. This is no discipline yet. This is just doing a task. Step two is going to be to get organized. So what this means is we're going to write down and figure out all of our online logins for all of our financial accounts. We need to know how to access them. We need to figure out our interest rates on things. So if we've got credit card debt, which credit cards have what amount of interest on them? Oftentimes we don't know that. Or if we're making money on something, how much interest are we charging on the thing that we're making? We need to figure out what our payoff amounts are on any debts. So if we're in debt to Visa, how much money do we owe Visa before we can pay it off? If we've got a mortgage, how much money is owed to pay that off in full if we could do it today? We need to figure out the value of our property. Now, I get this is a lot to do. This is not an easy process. I didn't give you any guarantee that this would be an easy process, but we need to figure out a value of our property. Now, if that property is physical real estate, you can go onto Zillow or Redfin. It'll tell you an approximation of what the value of the property is. If the property is something like a car, we can go and look up the price and the value of that used car online. And the same with other assets we might own. We also want to figure out if we've got a portfolio, if we've got investments, how much do we have in there? Where is that currently at? How much are we making? How much are we losing? Figure all that out. If you're making passive income, that needs to be applied here. Calculate your net worth. So you want to figure out how much you're worth. That is going to be, net worth is essentially how much you own versus how much you owe. So if you have a bunch of stuff that you own and you owe nothing, you're definitely gonna have a positive net worth. However, if you're buried in debt and you have nothing to show for it, well, then you're gonna have a negative net worth. Now, there's no shame in where you're at right now. There's shame in not taking progress and momentum into getting to where you want to go. So don't be ashamed, especially to the point where you don't take action. The whole point of this is to take action. And lastly, we're going to want to create a P&L list, which stands for profit and loss. Basically, we want to know every single month how much money we're taking in and how much money we're losing. We need to know, we have to have a balance sheet. We need to know, hey, are we taking in too much? Or not, are we taking in too much? You can't take in too much, but are we taking in too little to afford all the debts that we've got, all the liabilities, all the bills, the power bill and the gas and the utilities and the rent and insurance, all of that stuff. So that's what is involved in the getting organized phase. Here it is again, real quick succession. Figure out all your online logins, know what your interest rates are, figure out what your payoff amount is on any debts you have, identify the value of each one of any property you own. Figure out if you have a portfolio, figure out what the value is on it. Identify any passive income you have and how much that is. Calculate your net worth and create a profit and loss sheet. Again, that's a lot to do. That's a lot to do. That's only step 2. Step 2 is all of that. We're just getting started though. It gets exciting because in step 3, we're just getting prepped to actually start digging ourselves out of this trapped lifestyle that we might find ourselves in our journey toward financial freedom. So, step 3, you ready? Here we go. Okay, this is where it's gonna start getting difficult. Step 3 is you have to make sure that your income exceeds your expenses. Now, for many people, they already live in this situation, but not everybody. For a lot of people, their expenses exceed their income, and that's a really scary situation because it means that every single month you're gonna be falling farther and farther behind. The anxiety is gonna rise, and you'll eventually get to a state of panic. So, we've gotta fix that. And the first thing we do is to identify it. Imagine a sink in your kitchen and you've got the faucet running. That's your income. That's what's coming into your world. But unfortunately, at the bottom of the sink, you've got that drain and the drain's wide open. So all the money that's coming in is going right back out. There's 2 ways to fix this. Most people think that, hey, if I can increase my income, I'll be able to sustain and not worry about what I'm losing, all my expenses that are going out the bottom of the sink. Well, the other way to handle this is to plug the drain. If you plug the drain, you eventually the sink will fill up with water, and water in this metaphor is money. So what we want to do is we want to essentially, the easiest way to do this is to reduce our amount of expenses. And there's several ways to do this. I think of it in 5 levels of cutting expenses. So the first level is in stopping the bleeding, which is essentially what we're doing, is we're gonna stop spending anything that we don't care about. So for example, you might go onto your bank account and you might look up and go like, oh, did you know that $15 a month is being spent on a subscription to a car wash that is out of state that I never even go to? Man, I should really not have that subscription. Because we got organized earlier, we should be able to find all of these expenses that we don't even care about. And the first thing to do is cut all of those. Now, if we cut all of those and our income still isn't as much as our expenses, then we need to move on to level 2 of cutting our expenses. And this is where people start freaking out. This is when you start cutting the wants you have in your life. This is not the needs. We're not cutting the things that you absolutely need to have. We're only cutting the wants. So what's the difference between a want and a need? Well, a need is something that you will die if you don't have, or you'll fail to succeed in living if you don't have. A want is something that you often like, you really enjoy. So for example, you need food, but you might want to eat out. You don't need to eat out, you just want to. So you could cut eating out on a regular basis. We need The air we breathe, we want entertainment. We might want that Netflix subscription, but we don't need it. So that's something that you could cut in this level 2. So the next step is to start going through all of the things that you want to have and that you're enjoying, getting your nails done, paying for that expensive haircut. You know how much it costs me to put this bald cap on every time I shoot a video? Very expensive, or I'm lying. But step 2, or level 2 of cutting your spending is going to be to cut your wants. Now, if you cannot reduce your wants until to the point where your income is greater than your expenses, well then you have to move on to the level 3 version of stopping the bleeding. This is really hard, and this is about cutting your needs. Now I know you're gonna say, Tyus, you just told me that needs are something that if I don't have, I'm gonna die. Well, that's true. However, there are ways to outsource your needs. There are things that you need, but maybe you can survive without you paying for them. So for example, maybe if you've cut all your wants, if you've actually cut all your wants, most people are not willing to cut all their wants, but if you really did, and your income is still less than how much you're spending every month, maybe it's time to move back in with mom and dad. And so you don't have to pay rent or that mortgage. I mean, maybe it's that bad. Maybe that's what we need to do. If things are truly as bad as they can get, you're going to have to figure out ways to cut the things that you need, like your shelter, and maybe ask a friend to help pay for that shelter. Maybe it's time to get on welfare. I'm not a fan of welfare, but if you're in a situation where you can't even afford the things you need, maybe you need the charity of others to provide that for you. And if that's not enough, if that is not enough, then we even move on to the level 4 of cutting our spending. There's 5 levels in total. Level 4 is to essentially stop even paying our debts. So we've made these promises to people that if you're at a level 4, if you've cut the things you don't need and the things you want and the things you even need, you're outsourcing that. Well, at this point, you need to stop paying the debts you have. You can't afford the debts you have. They're too big. You need to start cutting back on even those. And if that isn't enough, well, at that point you go into level 5, which is you need to start looking at some legal opportunities. Specifically, you're probably gonna be looking at bankruptcy. But hopefully, you found that by cutting back on stuff you don't need or stuff you don't want, you'll probably find that you can get to a point where your income exceeds your expenses. Couldn't say expenses. Your income exceeds your expenses. That's where you need to be. If you're at that point, we can move on to the next step. I know that last step was hard. I know, it was really hard. It's painful to lose things from your life, but it's really important. If you want to live a financially free existence, it's what you gotta do. Okay, let's say you did that. Let's say you actually cut back on all your expenses until now you're in a situation where your income exceeds your expenses. Maybe you were already there, which if that's the case, good for you. That's awesome. You just skipped ahead. Extra credit. Congrats. So now we're going to make sure that we have a little bit of buffer in place. Now there's going to be multiple times throughout this process where you need to increase the amount of buffer. And what the buffer is it's a safety net. It's a cushion. It's what's in place in case something goes wrong. And you might be thinking, well, why am I worried about what's in place if something goes wrong when I haven't even addressed all of the mountains of debt I have? Well, it's really, really important that you have a safety net, because here's what happens if you don't. If you don't have a safety net and you're putting all your money toward paying down your debts, what's gonna happen is the engine in your car is gonna blow up or something terrible, like the roof is gonna fall in on you at some point. Something unexpected is going to happen. And when that unexpected thing happens, you're not gonna be ready for it. And then you're going to have to go into deeper debt in order to pay for it. So if you don't have any amount of cushion to protect you from that, it's going to force you into greater debt. And that's why it's really, really important before even paying off debt to create a buffer, to create a cushion, to create a small amount of savings. And level 1, this first version, there's 5 of these as well, the first level of that savings is going to be to put aside enough to pay your mortgage or your rent payment for 1 month. Just 1 month. Now, if you don't have a mortgage or a rental payment because you're living with parents or family or friends or whatever the case may be, then the goal is going to be putting $1,000 aside. So whichever one of those is larger, either $1,000 or how much you're supposed to pay in rent each month or how much you're supposed to pay in your mortgage each month, put that aside, put it into an account that you're not going to touch. And if something does happen, if there is an emergency where you must touch it, where you have to pull this money out, that's okay. pull that money out, but now you have to go back to bringing that money back up to that level, whether it's $1,000 or a monthly payment of your mortgage. You've got to rebuild that account if you have to use it before moving on to the next step. And that next step is paying off your smallest debt. Now, the reason you pay off your smallest debt is really for a psychological reason. Now, the most financially smart thing to do is to pay off the debt that has the biggest interest rate. And we're going to get to doing that later. But that sometimes can be a long time in the making. Sometimes that's a big debt. And so what we want to do is we want to rack up a small win. We want to create some momentum. So we're going to look for the smallest debt that we've got. Maybe we owe $200 on a credit card. And with every bit of income that we have that exceeds our expenses, after we've put our money into that savings, that we've got a little bit of a cushion, we're going to put it all toward that debt until that debt is paid off. We've just created some momentum. We are now on a forward moving path. We've got some, we're creating a snowball. This is good. This is where we want to start. And I know this might feel a little scary because now we're moving in this responsible direction. But this is really, really important in creating momentum, and it's really important for your psychology, because once that single debt is paid off, you're gonna realize, oh my gosh, maybe this is doable. Maybe I can make momentum, maybe I can progress. And I know maybe you've got $50,000, $100,000 in debt and you just paid off a $200 debt, not a big deal, but it is a big deal. It's forward momentum. You've got this. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, we are now going to increase that amount of savings we have put aside. I know we just did savings and then we paid off a small debt. And now you're saying save more? Put more aside? Yes, it's important. Like I said before, it's important to have something put aside in case the worst case scenario happens. And as our debts are being reduced, now we're gonna wanna make sure that our protection, essentially, we're playing offense and defense. We want to make sure our protection's a little higher. So now instead of having a monthly payment of your mortgage or rent or $1,000, we're not going to make it a full month of your expenses. So you should already know what a full month of your expenses are. If you did the research side of this and the planning at the very beginning, you should look at it and say, hey, this is my expenses for a month. So you should have an idea of what that is, whether that is, I don't know, $3,000. We're gonna make sure whatever that is, we're gonna have that aside. Now, this does not have to be in addition to the original savings amount we had. We're just adding enough to the existing savings we had, whether, let's say it was $1,000, we're adding it till we have a full month in advance sitting there ready to go. So now, if we were to lose our job, we now have a month of savings to get back on our feet, to get hired again, to get that income back in place so that we can get back on track rather than falling deeper and deeper into debt. That's the trap. We want to avoid that at all costs. So we're building our savings a little bit. Again, this is playing defense while we play offense. So let's move back to the next step, which is offensive. I don't mean it's offensive. I mean it's offensive. Like we're going to be going after our debt. We're going to be crushing it. We're going to be destroying it. So we're going to take all the debts that we have remaining, if we got debts remaining, and we're going to put them in order from the highest interest rate to the lowest interest rate. And we're going to go after them by the highest interest rate to the lowest interest rate. Now, this is the most financially advantageous approach. Now, it's not the most psychologically advantageous approach. The most psychologically advantageous, the one that makes you feel the best, is to go after your smallest debts to your largest debts, because you'll find that it's faster to get through them. However, financially speaking, it is better to pay off your highest interest rates first. So that's what I would recommend doing. If you think you're going to have a problem psychologically being that disciplined, fine, you could change it around and go after the smallest debts. That's fine if you want to. The whole point of this is to get out of debt. But here's the key. Every time you pay off one of these cards or debts or loans or whatever it might be, you're going to take what you were paying into that and put that into the next one that you pay off. And then you're going to take the payments that you were putting into that and put that into the next one until this amount that you're paying on each debt becomes larger and larger and larger. It's called a debt snowball. It becomes a pretty big payment eventually. And I know this is really, really intimidating, and this can be very hard to do, and it can take a long time to do it. I've done it. I went through this process, and I think it probably took me 6 months to get through this particular step. You can too. If you choose to put your head down and decide this is the priority in your life because you're willing right now to live on less so that later on you can have the life of freedom that you really, really want. So You're going to do this. You're going to pay off your debts and roll the payments from one card into the next payment on the next card until you're making larger and larger payments, and you're just crushing your debt until you're debt free. Now, that does not mean you're financially free, but it does mean you're debt free. Now, they say that the borrower is slave to the lender. So if you have just ridden yourself of the shackles of debt, congratulations, that is tremendous. It's time to play a little bit more defense. We're going to up the stakes on our defense, which remember is having some security put aside. So we went from having 3 months or 1 month of security. Now we're going to increase that to 3 months of security in case something were to fall. We're not going to fall into poverty. With 3 months of savings put aside, of expenses put aside, we could fall into some pretty big problems and still get out of it. Now keep in mind that if for any reason you had to use this security, this buffer that you've built up, you have to rebuild that buffer before you move on to the next step. And that next step is to start paying yourself. Isn't that crazy? They've always said pay yourself first, but what does that really mean? Well, it means that before your money goes to pay your bills or to pay your rent or anything else, it goes to pay you. So all that money that you were using to pay down debts up until this point, you're now going to use to pay yourself. What does that mean? Does that mean it's going into your savings, like that buffer account we've been talking about? Well, it is going to go into savings. It is going to be put aside, but it's not going to be put aside in case of security. It's going to be put aside because we're going to use it later. We're going to be building up a little war chest of little soldiers that are going to be working to make you more money. And that starts by paying yourself so that you're ready. You've got enough money to buy into some investments. Now, here are some traps that people fall into. If during this process you end up making more money than you were at the time when we started the process, all increases in your income, those count as being paid to yourself. That is not an increase in your lifestyle. That does not mean go out and buy a new car. That does not mean go out and subscribe to a bunch of online subscriptions. It means that you've increased the value you're bringing to society, and you're going to pay yourself with that. That does not mean you're going to reward yourself. We're not at the stage of rewarding yourself yet. We have a long way to go before that, but keep in mind the goal here is to become free. It's not to live lavishly now so that we can suffer later. Our goal is to buckle down right now so that we can have what we want later. So if our income increases, great, but we're gonna take that increase and we're gonna put it aside. That means if I get a raise, if I get a raise of 15%, I'm gonna take that 15% and I'm gonna put it into this account, and that account is going to be used for the next step. Oh, this one's exciting. We put aside a bunch of money. We've paid ourselves that money. What are we gonna do with it? Well, we're going to invest it. We are going to have our little soldiers, which I call dollar bills, we are going to have them work for us while we sleep. We're gonna start generating passive income. This is a big deal to start generating. This is life-changing. So you should, at this point, feel pretty secure. You've got savings put aside, so in case something bad happens, you're gonna be okay, and you don't have debt collectors knocking at your door. Oh, by the way, in paying down your debt, don't worry about paying your house off or anything yet. If you have a house and a mortgage, don't worry about that yet. When we were talking about paying off your debts, we were talking about paying off car loans, we were talking about paying off credit cards, things like that. But now we're gonna be talking about investing. So we put aside money that is ours, we grew it a little bit until we've got enough where we can start buying something that makes us money. So things that could do that would include like dividends. Dividends, when you buy dividends, now dividends is different than stocks. Dividends is a form of stock, but it pays you. They issue you money for having dividends. Pretty cool, right? Or another thing you can invest in is real estate. So you could buy up some real estate and then rent it out to somebody and they're paying you money. In fact, 90% of self-made millionaires over the last 2 decades, over the last 200 years have been made in real estate. That is the #1 way of becoming rich. The third way you can invest your money is into businesses. So you could either create a business or you could invest in somebody else's business in exchange for part of its income. Now, don't be fooled. Don't fall into the trap of creating a business only to become self-employed by that business. That is not the path to freedom. That is the path to enslaving yourself. You can create a business where you are trading your time for money and you find, oh my God, I've got no time because I keep doing everything I can to grow my business. Well, then that's not really a business, that's self-employment. And that's a big difference. What you want to do is you want to take the assets you've put aside that you've been paying yourself with and buy investments with that. So whether that is dividends, real estate, or businesses that pay you money, that's what you're going to be investing in, at least for now. The next step is based off of time. And once you've gotten yourself out of having those basic debts, once you are debt free, you start the timer. And 2 years after that, we're going to increase our defense. We're going to go from having 3 months of savings put aside, 3 months of our expenses put aside. We're going to increase that to 6 months. You might be going, my gosh, man, why do we keep increasing how much we have put aside? Well, it's because we're about to make a huge financial move. If you've gotten this far, you've done an incredible job with your life, you're debt free, you've got some investments, you're probably making some passive income by now. And now, 2 years of being debt free, it's time to consider buying your own home. Now that doesn't mean paying off your home if you already have one, but if you don't have a home, it might be time to purchase one. The reason we waited 2 years is because it's very, very difficult to get a mortgage without having 2 years of income to show for it. So if you've had 2 years of income that you've been able to show, and you find a place that doesn't exceed what you're already paying for in your rent, so the mortgage payment needs to be the same or less than what you're paying in your rent. A common mistake people make when buying a house is they buy too much house. They go, I'm only gonna buy one house ever. That's not true. You're going to probably buy many, many houses in your life, especially if you've gotten this far where you're this disciplined and you're progressing at this rate. You're probably gonna own a bunch of homes real soon. So don't be afraid of knowing that, hey, I'm probably gonna have plenty of different houses. Buy a small house, buy something that's really reasonable, easy to maintain, something that's not gonna have a lot of expenses. In fact, if you can, have something that reduces your expenses. And you can be really, really creative in buying it. One great way of buying a house is a lease to own, where you're leasing the house, but your lease goes into essentially a down payment where you can end up owning the house. Another great way, which is similar, is called owner financing, where you find somebody who's ready to sell their house, but they're flexible enough where they're willing to let you essentially just pay them every month to buy the house at that value. They act like the bank. So they're not getting paid the entire value of the house. They would prefer to get paid every single month because they like that income on a constant basis, while you end up owning a property. Now, the rich own homes. That's why it's important that you end up owning a home. But keep in mind that your home is not an asset. Your home is a liability. Your home ends up costing you money because things do break. Now, there are situations, I'm in a fortunate one where I've turned my home into an asset. I rent out some rooms in my house, and part of my house is an Airbnb, and so I make money off of the house that I live in. But most people don't. So keep in mind, keep your house small, cost effective, but you don't want to be throwing your money away at rent that gives you nothing. At least when you own a home, you own the equity, the value of that home. So every payment you're putting in at least is going into your ownership. Your net worth is increasing by owning a home, and that's why this step is so important. Okay, we're quickly getting to the finish line here. The next thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna grow your assets until your passive income is bringing in 3 times what the cost of your living is. So if you can basically make 3 times what you need to in passive income, that means that what you live on, let's say it costs you $5,000 a month to live. That's what your expenses are. That means you're bringing in $15,000, which means that $10,000 a month is coming in passively and going back into you paying yourself to grow more assets. You're essentially creating that debt snowball in reverse, where you're becoming super free. You're becoming incredibly free. You're basically on the home stretch. We're almost there. This is the last time we're going to increase the amount of cushion or emergency fund we have in place. We're going to increase it to be 1 year of our expenses. I know that's a lot, but at this point, everything's looking great. So fantastic, put aside a year's worth of your expenses. Now you know you're gonna be good under all conditions. One last step, and that last step is to pay off the mortgage on your house if you've got a mortgage, and you're done. You did it. you're financially free. You have paid off your house. You're making more money passively than you need by a lot. And you've learned the process of making passive income. Now, I know you watched this video over whatever, 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long I pontificated for. And I know you're looking at this being like, actually, I am still in debt right now. You paint a rosy picture, Tyus, but I'm not where I want to be yet. I get it. But maybe along this journey, you saw how that path could grow, that there are steps, there is a process in doing it. They've shown that if you take money away from somebody who's financially rich, that did it themselves, they'll get back to that same point. And if you give money to somebody who is poor, unfortunately, they'll get back to that same point. People follow the habits that they know. And so I've just given you essentially a list, the list of habits that successful people do to become financially free. It's now up to you to implement those habits. And if you do, you're going to have a much better life, a much better lifestyle. Financial freedom is not everything. There's still psychology, there's still relationships, there's still health and fitness to master. There's more to this game, and there are levels all around us that are harder and harder to achieve, but we're closer to it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you find it valuable, share it with some people, hit the subscribe button below, and there's a lot more videos to come and a bunch that are already on my channel worth checking out. I hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.